All right, we're finally getting ready to put some fiberglass on this boat. And, you know, we've talked about all this, but just to make sure that you've done all this before you get started, we've got our stems already shaped, right? I've got them nice and flush with the side of the boat. And again, I told you, I like my stems coming to a point, following the curves of the boat. So that's what I've done here. If you're gonna do that, my suggestion is I take a belt sander and I take a lot of the meat off. Being very, very careful not to hit the boat, because if a belt sander hits that cedar, it's going to go quick, right? But you can take an awful lot out, and then just take a rasp. You can get a lot more of it, and then just, you know, take your hands, or take a what we call a misery board. It's just a piece of wood with high grit paper on it, and then just keep following it down till you get a nice smooth contour there. Okay, I'm not worried about finishing up the ends, because the fiberglass now, the idea, and one of the reasons I like to do it this way, is I like to run my fiberglass right up the sides of the stems, so these laminations are covered with fiberglass. That way I don't ever have to worry about them again. But I'm not worried about finishing up the ends here just yet, because I'm going to run the fiberglass past it, and I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it a little bit long for it to dry. I'll come back with a razor knife, and then I'll sand everything down nice and smooth. All right, but you can see that she came together really nice up here. And I want you to pay attention here to how I faded it into the boat. One of the things that really isn't optional is making sure that you're flush right here, right? You don't want to leave this sticking up so that it can get caught on something while you're in the water, right? So all this is nice and flushed out here. And then I've got that rounded over. My fiberglass will probably come at least down this far, covering all this end up, making everything nice and tight. All right, so I wanted to show you how it would all work out if you overcut, right? And so let's take a look down here. And again, I didn't do this because I'm endorsing that you do this. I did this just to show you it's not the end of the world if this happens to you, right? So this is where we cut too far back, and you can see this dark space right here. That's the wood filler. After we sanded it all down, it looks like that. Now, right now it looks a little bit milky, but it's not gonna stay like that. Once the fiberglass goes over, it'll darken up and it'll look just fine. So, not the end of the world if you do that. I wanted to make sure, because just so many people, although we explain this to them, they do it anyway. So many people do it that I just thought we really ought to show you what to do if you do that, all right? But what I want you to do is be careful when you're cutting this, and just stop sooner. You can always make a cut here, make another cut half inch away, whatever, and cut a little bit more off, but you can't put it back on other than what we've done here with the filler, all right? And again, I smoothed all this in so that this is a nice smooth transition right up the side of the stem. Okay, so we're gonna pull some cloth out. But before we do, I'm gonna lock this boat down. I wanna go over one quick thing. There are two schools of thought out there. One says put a saturation coat on the boat before you put the fiberglass on. And then there's another one that says you don't have to use a saturation coat. No. And some people are really zealots about this, believing one way or the other. Now, in this shop, when we're using 10 ounce or greater cloth, like if we're building a runabout, or if we're building a dory, and we're going to be using 10 ounce cloth on the boat, we will put a saturation coat on the boat first, and then we'll put the cloth on. The reason for that is the whole idea here is epoxy is a glue, right? So my goal is to get epoxy saturated into the cloth and saturated onto the wood so that it dries and sticks together. Now, with the epoxy that we use and sell and ship out here, we don't have any problems getting it through 6 ounce cloth and onto a cedar boat. Okay, so using a saturation coat on this boat would be a waste of time, a waste of money, in my opinion. But again, on 10 ounce or greater, bigger boats, you got a lot more cloth, it's harder to get it through. If you're doing a 20-foot boat, sometimes it just makes it easier because you don't have to saturate as much. But when you're doing a canoe or a kayak or something like that, there's really no reason for it. And I'm about to show you exactly how we put this on, and you'll see why there's no reason for it. But if you're one of those people who said, you know what, I read it on the internet, got to do it, then make sure you use ultra high density rollers so it'll give you the smoothest possible finish, because the last thing in the world you want to do is take sandpaper to it after you've done a saturation coat. Once you put the saturation coat on, that's it, leave it alone. Next thing you should be doing is putting the cloth on top of that after that dries, tack free. All right, so ultra high density rollers, let it dry tack free, and then put your cloth on. I'm going to show you how to do it without doing a saturation coat, because This DVD is about doing wood cedar strip kayaks, and so I don't have to worry about doing the big dories. Okay, I'm gonna roll this cloth out and make some quick snips, and then we'll get started. All right, now, you don't want to be wasteful when you're doing your cloth. So, you know you're going to be cutting off the excess. So what I like to do is kind of get all the excess to one side. Make sure whatever your run is, that it goes past the boat at least a foot on both ends. And then make sure in the center of your boat that you've got, you know, at least about an inch or so, probably go with 2 or 3 inches of hang over there, hanging down the side. Okay. And then everything that's over here, we're gonna just trim right off. All right, once you cut off your excess, kind of wrap that up as neat as possible, because we'll be using this again. We're going to be taking this, and because this is a kayak and people tend to go into shallow waters when they launch and come back into shallow waters when they get out, the bottom's a little bit vulnerable. So we're going to be using this so that we can put a second layer just on our bottom, but we'll get to that after we've done this. All right, we've got our rough cut in the cloth. We are generally stretched out nicely here. You can see little wrinkles in the cloth. Don't worry about those. I know that there's somehow been released in, I don't know if it's a book or on the internet, but somebody released that if you got wrinkles in your cloth that you can't put epoxy over the top. Absolutely untrue. There's no truth in that whatsoever. These wrinkles and creases are going to come right out as soon as we saturate it, so don't worry about that at all. Don't bother cutting the ends. We're going to cut that during the process, because if we cut it now, chances are we're going to overcut it and we're going to be really unhappy with ourselves. So right now I'm just going to mix up some clear epoxy and we're going to start putting this down. All right, while we're mixing this up, go over a couple more quick things. I'm just doing 6 ounces at a time. That gives me not too much to work with, because the last thing in the world you want it to do is to start getting warm in the cup on you. And again, I know I've said this before, I'm saying it again, close, close, close. This stuff gets on your clothes, it's all over, so don't be wearing your favorite football shirt or anything silly like that. Make sure you mix it up really well. And I figured I knew one of the guys who invented one of these epoxies at one of these epoxy companies, and I once asked him, how much do you really have to stir this? And he says, well, just stir it until you can't see any striations anymore and all the colors mixed together. And when you think it's done, stir it a little more. So that's pretty much the philosophy I live under here. Want to use gloves whenever possible. Keep it off your skin. Some people do have bad skin reactions to this stuff. If you keep it off your skin, you shouldn't have any problems. And one of the best ways to do this is if you can get yourself a helper. So that they could do some stirring and mixing while you're putting it on the boat. That way there, you don't have to worry about it. Once you start the process of putting fiberglass cloth on a boat, you cannot stop. You have to finish. Or, if you have to stop, if something happens, then wherever you stop, you need to cut the rest of the cloth and get it off the boat. Because you don't want half-saturated cloth on that boat, because then you'll have to just sand it and grind it off the boat, and you don't want to do that. So, in a perfect world, you should start and finish the job all at once. Now this is a small boat. This is going to take less than 45 minutes to do this whole thing. I'm sure of it. But if it's a really big boat, then I would definitely have a couple of hands on deck. Or if you're going to do it in this section, plan that. Do like half of the boat or a little bit past half, cut the cloth nice and clean, and then come back when you feel you can, do the other half of the boat, and have about a 2 or 3 inch overlap seam in the middle of the boat, because once you put your filler coats on and everything, you can dissolve that and make it go away. All right, let's put this on the boat. Okay, when mixing these things together, ratios are important. And make sure you check the directions on the bottle. And make sure you stick to whatever ratios they say. Now, what I'm using right now is a 2-to-1 ratio. So that means I've got 2 parts resin for every 1 part hardener. And I'm just taking a spreader here. I'm spreading it through the cloth and onto the boat. And I'm doing that roughly at about a 45-degree angle. And I just push it right down through the cloth. I'm not trying to scrape up all the excess yet. Right now I'm just trying to get cloth saturated. All right, so you can see without doing a filler coat, using 6-ounce cloth and this particular resin, I can easily get it through the fiberglass and onto the boat. Now when you're doing this, you start in the middle, you work your way out and down. And if you notice, you should be able to see with the camera, we've got plastic on the floor here. I recommend if you're doing this in your garage, the plastic that the $10 or $15 you're going to spend on plastic is well worth the money, because epoxy sticks really, really well to concrete. All right, this is all I'm going to keep doing now until we get to the ends. We certainly have enough on there to know how much we can cut off. So at this point, I'm going to cut right up the cloth, right up the stem, I mean, to where it will comfortably roll over, that I can put epoxy on. And for me, that appears to be right about here. I'm gonna go back a little bit further because I got a bung hole there. I don't want to fill that up with epoxy if I don't have to. Yeah. All right. And I will go down and do something similar to the other side. So there she is. She's pretty, huh? All you want to do is make sure that you get plenty in that cloth, get it good and saturated, but don't leave it pooled up. No pools, no puddles, no runs, no drips. So good and saturated, and you'll be able to tell if it's not, because you'll see the white of the cloth. It won't look quite right, or you'll see the hash of the cloth going back and forth to weave, and you'll know that you need more epoxy there. But if it comes out clear, and you can see through the wood no problem, then you know you've done a good job. Now, you'll be able to see the weave, but it'll all be full and colorful in the color of the wood. So I'm not suggesting that you want to scrape off all the excess or anything like that. And basically, you can hear, as I run this over that, you can hear the grain of the cloth up against the spreader. Okay, we're getting ready to leave this alone for the night. And we're not worried about filling the weave, because like I said, we're going to come back and we're going to do filler coats with that later on. And if you do it this way, you'll get the nicest finish, because you don't have to worry about runs and drips and sanding all that off and the headaches that come with that, because you might grind into the cloth and so on and so forth. So we're going to do a nice light color. It's kind of like putting varnish on your boat, right? You're better off doing 7 or 8 thin coats than you are 1 or 2 thick coats. Same idea with this. You want to put on enough, not too much, and then we're going to come back and we're going to fill it in later with a couple of more coats, and then it'll be ready for sand and varnish. But she looks good, so I'm just going to stop playing around with it, put everything away, and let it dry overnight. And then tomorrow, we'll go ahead and we'll cut a pattern so that we can double up on this bottom, and that'll help you folks when you get close to shore, so that you're bound to hit gravel and rocks. So let's put a little extra protection on the bottom of that boat.